The Supreme Court is going to be taking up the week of April 22nd oral arguments as to the former president's push for immunity from any of these charges, because he was president at the time, and you do that, all of the presidents are always in danger. But again, that would delay a host of potential trials, including the entire January 6th thing, to go on and on. Andrew McCarthy, the former assistant U.S. attorney, a Fox News contributor, Julian Manchester of The Hill, the national politics reporter. Andrew, a lot of people leapt on this unanimous decision to say, all right, well, maybe the immunity case goes the same way. It's kind of legal apples and oranges, though, isn't it?
It is, and I'm not even on board with the unanimous decision euphoria. I actually think this is a 5-4 decision, Neil, on one of the most important issues, which is whether Congress itself in the next January 6th would have been able to invoke Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to disqualify Trump. The majority, the 5 justices who wrote the per curiam, as they called it, said that basically you have to be convicted under the federal penal law of insurrection in order for that to be invoked. 4 justices on the court, Justice Barrett didn't think they should reach that at all. And the 3 progressives on the court were pretty strident in their opposition to the majorities having done that. And they refer to the other opinion as the majority opinion, not the per curiam. So I'm not on board with this whole idea that this was, a kumbaya moment where the court spoke with one voice, 9-0. I think if you get into the opinion a little bit, that's really not what happened. But you're quite right. The immunity case is a different case. Trump is expected to lose that case, I think, by most legal analysts. And, the other thing that's out there is the obstruction case that the court will also decide. So there's a lot of rounds to be played here.
Yeah, something tells me, Julia, when we do hear from the former president, he's not going to sort of thread the needle the way Andrew brilliantly just did. He's going to talk about the unanimous feature there, and that is sort of the latest signs that he is taking control of these legal issues. So far, it's going his way, but we always forget he has $500 million in payments he has to put up to make good on E. Jean Carroll and the fines there enacted, and of course what's happening on his business front from the New York State Attorney General. He has to put up all of that dough. So it's not as if he's running away scot-free from some problems. But what do you make of all of this, Julia?
Look, I mean, this is something that we are going to see former President Trump tout as a victory. You're absolutely right, Neil. And he's not going to get into the nuance of this, or he's very unlikely to get into the nuance of this. And that probably makes sense for him. I think when a lot of Americans read this headline, they're going to see this unanimous decision. And this was something that the Trump campaign was not necessarily worried about. I think a lot of legal experts, political experts expected this ruling, at least at the top level, where it was unanimous. So we're really going to continue to see him tout this. And in terms of how this impacts the Republican presidential primary, the race, look, there's absolutely that argument that he still has millions of dollars in legal payments, and that could very much play a role in his campaign going forward. But on top of that, you also have this argument that, some Republicans have been making, well, what happens in the case he's not able to appear on these ballots? They can no longer make that argument. So this, on the top line at least, is a huge victory for Trump. You're going to see him touting it, especially going into Super Tuesday tomorrow.
In the meantime, Andrew, as you've spotlighted here, Donald Trump is all about, running out the clock or pushing things back if he can. And then they have the Supreme Court and the oral arguments April 22nd to sort of beat around this issue as to whether the immunity kind of defense is a worthwhile one. But let's say they don't make a decision on it. They hear the arguments. Timeline that out for me if you can, because everything rests on that if you think about it.
Yeah, I think, Neil, probably the most important development last week that didn't get enough attention is that Jack Smith's team, when they were arguing the documents case down in Florida, announced that the so-called 60-day rule, this unwritten rule of the Justice Department that they're not supposed to take action within 60 days of an election to avoid influencing it, they regard it as not operative in connection with Trump because he's already been indicted. And what I take that to mean is that they expect that Trump is going to lose the immunity claim and that they will be able to begin a trial against him after Labor Day and run that trial through Election Day if that's how long it takes to try it. So I think that, to the extent that people are looking at what happened today and saying the lawfare campaign has failed, I would just point out to people that a defendant is required to be in court for every day of a criminal trial. And I think these guys are planning to try him from September through November.
That obviously would be very disruptive to Donald Trump in the middle of a presidential campaign, assuming he's the Republican nominee, Julia. Then there's the issue if he's convicted on any of these charges, how that would resonate. The consensus seems to be a conviction changes the game. I'm not so sure among his most enthusiastic supporters whether it does. 90 some odd indictments haven't done that. Maybe a conviction would. What do you think?
Look, I think when we talk about a conviction in the general election sense, we need to look at the independent swing voters that Trump and Biden are both vying for. And if Donald Trump is making these court appearances from September to November, of course, there's this logic that he's going to get all this free media attention. He's going to be able to make a spectacle out of all these courtroom appearances, appear outside and talk to the media that way. But if you sort of contrast that with the Biden campaign, assuming President Biden is, on the trail and sending his surrogates on the trail and talking about kitchen table issues like the economy, I would imagine that the contrast would hurt Donald Trump because he would be forced to talk about his legal issues. And, that would absolutely run up the margins in terms of his base. But I don't know how that's going to play in a general election sense. That's why you're seeing the Biden campaign be very careful about how they approach, questions about Donald Trump's legal issues. They want to be careful because they know that that's not necessarily a top priority for voters that might be on the fence between a Trump and a Biden.
I'm glad you pointed that out, Judy, because from Team Biden, it's been crickets. No response to this, one way, shape, or form. We'll talk about the Supreme Court decision today. Andrew, what does Donald Trump risk if he over-talks about this? You know what I mean? Like he overplays this. If you were his lawyer advising him, which is always a Herculean task, what would you tell him as we wait to see what he thinks of this?
I'd first tell him, Neil, that it's important that I get my fee up front. The way things are going, I think that needs to be established. As far as what he says, I really think that ship has kind of sailed with him. There's never been a lawyer that they've ever created, Roy Cohn included, who's able to tell this guy anything that he, follows for more than 10 minutes or so. And I just think he's going to say what he says if he thinks it's expedient for political purposes, because he really regards what he's in right now as more of a political battle than a legal one. And you could always tell him that he should exercise restraint when he speaks, because the court that decided this case is going to decide the next case and maybe other ones that are equally important. But I just don't think that resonates with him as advice.
It's interesting, guys, that the backdrop for this was showing you the markets, and that's not accidental, Julia. I mean, the backdrop for the president has been these soaring markets all of a sudden, not so much today with the Dow, but certainly for a lot of technology stocks. It's under his stewardship and watch, whether you want to credit him or not, that artificial intelligence seemed to get some street cred with the numbers we got out of NVIDIA and some of these other big names that proved there's real money to be made there, and by the billions and hundreds of billions that across the broad swath of companies now that are likening this to the internet boom without the fear of a bust so far, because they said there's real money being made, and this isn't imaginary money. It's real money, real investment bets being placed. Add that to the steady job gains we've been seeing, and on Friday, a jobs report that could show maybe another 200,000. To hear from the Biden folks, that's their wind at their back. Forget about these cases that Donald Trump might win here and there or whatever. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it makes sense that the Biden campaign is claiming credit for that. And it's another example of how they're turning the attention away from, Donald Trump's legal issues and putting it onto the economy. They've been talking about lowering unemployment under the Biden administration. They're probably going to continue to do it as well. And they've also been talking about unemployment when they've still been hit with inflation. And even though inflation does appear to start to be ticking down, you often hear from Republicans and critics of the Biden administration, rightfully so, that a lot of Americans aren't yet feeling the impacts of that. They're still paying more for goods and services, for example, in the grocery store. So the logic on the Biden campaign's part has been to say, look, this is going to be a process. It's going to take some time. And if we see that happen under the Biden administration, I think the average American is probably in their head going to, connect that to the Biden administration instead of going deeper and seeing, its connections to the Trump administration. So we're going to have to look and see how Trump sort of squares that circle, how he's able to, bring that back to his own campaign, his own administration. Because remember, Trump was in office 4 years ago. And, 4 years ago today, we were at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic when the markets and the economy, for better, no matter whether it was Donald Trump's fault, took a dive. The economy was not in a good place. So I think a lot of Americans sort of associate that with Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is really going to have to message around that.
Jill, I want to pursue that point because when Americans are asked about their own confidence and sentiment, there are a lot of different surveys. We follow the Michigan Sentiment Survey, Consumer Confidence Survey, put up by the Conference Board. It goes on and on. But almost to a survey, I wouldn't say universally, so I don't want to misstate it, Julia. More people are feeling a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more about not only their own finances, but where we're going. But here's the caveat with that. They're not giving credit to Joe Biden. He gets a little bit of that, but not a lot. And I think that has been sort of like the consternation of the White House. Like, hey, it's happening under our watch. Normally, presidents benefit from this when it's going on. We're not. So they're worried. Should they be worried?
I think they should. From talking to Democratic sources about this, they say, point once again to this being a long game. And they say this is going to take some time. It's going to take time for Americans to feel that. But, it also puts pressure on them to, maybe change their messaging or tweak their messaging on this to make sure that Americans, believe that this is something that happened under the Biden administration. You're starting to see, the Biden campaign talk about that when he goes to, various factories and plants for these, campaign stops he's been doing. But it's certainly a hurdle for them to, try to claim credit for this because it's not necessarily clear to a lot of Americans.
Got it. All right. We are waiting for the former president. His timing has been pushed back a little bit on this. We don't know exactly what he's going to say. Obviously,